And this morning I'm going to teach on wisdom. And I think wisdom is one of those things that we have to think about, meditate on, really bring to the top of the heap, so to speak, in our lives, because we live in a world that has very little self-control. Everybody wants things immediately. They want pleasure immediately. They want gratification immediately. And so some of the better virtues of the scripture sometimes get downplayed. And so it's important to remind ourselves of what the scripture says about wisdom. And honestly, it's sister, if you will, self-control, because it's one thing to know what to do. It's another thing to have the self-control to actually do it. And one thing I want to point out right from the start is that there's an awful lot about wisdom in the scripture, particularly in Proverbs. And you can see this if you just simply do a word search on wisdom and wise. In the Christian world, typically what happens is wisdom gets eclipsed by faith. And you can go on and listen to ministers talk, and there's an awful lot of talk about faith. And faith, of course, is trust. That's the Greek word pistis, trust. And trust in God and trust in what God has said is very, very important. But there are things that trust can't do, and we need to be aware of that. So, for example, if we look at Galatians chapter 6, verse 7, the Bible says, "Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever a person sows, that will he also reap." And so if a person, for example, is ungodly, let's say they're a thief, and they sow that and they end up in jail, they can't just have faith and all of a sudden, poof, they're outside the jail. God is not going to contradict himself. For example, it's wise. Remember in Proverbs, it says, "Go to the ant who stores its food in the summer so that it can live in the winter." And so, for example, having a savings and saving things up for harder times, that's wise to do. And sometimes if we ignore that advice and we don't store up things for harder times, when harder times come, all of a sudden we're in trouble. So what we want to do is go to the word and see what the word is saying to us. And there's an awful lot about wisdom. So let's start with wisdom right in Proverbs chapter 1, because the first 7 verses are an introduction. And we'll read that. It says, "The Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel, to know wisdom and teaching." And so right off the bat, we know that one of the things we're going to find out, one of the main things we're going to find out in Proverbs is about wisdom. To understand words that give understanding. Verse 3, to receive wise teaching in righteousness, justice, and integrity. Verse 4, to give prudence to the naive, knowledge and discretion to the youth. And this is another thing that's important about Proverbs, is that Proverbs is the only book of the Bible that's specifically addressed to the youth. And there's so much in Proverbs that will help young people, inexperienced people. That's what naive means when it says that it's going to give prudence to the naive. A naive person is inexperienced. Typically, they're young, they're simple. As we get into the text, then we find out that, well, some people are naive because they want to be naive. They don't want to engage in life. Don't get me involved. And so they are purposely naive. Being naive is not a blessing. Being naive is something that we're supposed to war against, if you will, to gain experience, to gain understanding, to gain prudence. By the way, these words that we're reading here in this introduction, understanding, discretion, prudence, these are going to come up in just a little bit. But, here they are in the introduction. And then verse 5, a wise person will listen and increase in learning, and a discerning person will get wise guidance. So while Proverbs is specifically addressed to the youth, it's also giving wisdom to the wise, and it's giving guidance to the prudent. And by the way, one of the things that I just love about Proverbs is that there are 31 Proverbs, 31 chapters of Proverbs in the book of Proverbs, and 31 days in most months. And there are times when, I talk to people and even myself where I've been reading a book and I kind of lose my place and what am I going to read? And I just look at my calendar. Like today is the 24th. And so just read Proverbs 24. And if you read the proverb that's the day of the month every day, then you're getting through Proverbs 12 times a year. And there's an incredible amount of learning in that. And I can tell you from my experience in reading the scripture that I can read a chapter of Proverbs 1 month and get something out of it, read it the next month and get something totally different out of it, read it the next month and get something totally different out of it, because your life is constantly changing. The circumstances of your life are constantly changing. So then we looked at Proverbs chapter 1, verse 8. Well, then Proverbs, let's see, we left off. Yeah, verse 6, to understand a proverb and an obscure expression, words of the wise and their riddles, because Proverbs was written in a way that some verses can have a number of different meanings, and it's important to reflect on the different meanings of the verse. And verse 7, the fear of Yahweh is the beginning of knowledge, but fools show contempt for wisdom and sound teaching. And one of the things I think we need to engage to properly understand this is when the Bible says the fear of Yahweh, it's using fear in a literal way. Yes, there's a modern, kind of a modern movement that, well, we're not supposed to be afraid of God. It's really the awe of God, that type of thing. The respect for God is the beginning of knowledge. We do want to hold God in awe. We do want to have respect for God. But the bottom line of our relationship with Yahweh is He is God and we're not. That kind of goes without saying. But the fact of the matter is, if we go and let's go just zoom real quick to Matthew chapter 10, verse 28. In Matthew chapter 10, verse 28, Christ is talking to his disciples. And the disciples had the same challenges, the same kind of questions that you and I had. Do you do this? Do you do that? What, do we give into the social pressures? Do we want to try to fit into our society? Blah, blah, blah. They didn't want to get thrown out of the synagogue. We don't want to get thrown out of social circumstances, that kind of thing. And Christ addresses that. And he says in verse 28 of chapter 10, Matthew chapter 10, do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul, meaning kill you as a person totally. Rather, fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in Gehenna. God has the power of life and death, and he also has the power of rewarding us or denying us rewards based on what we've done. So there's a bottom line understanding that God is, in my understanding, the way I would maybe make an analogy to this is God is like my electric fuse box. I know it's there, and I'm not gonna mess with it. It's too dangerous. I'm not gonna go sticking my hands in there and try to fix anything. I might fix a broken light bulb or something like that, but I'm not gonna go messing with the fuse box. I have great respect for it. I hold it in awe, if you will, of what it does, but I'm also afraid to go in and stick my hands in it and start messing with it. And that's kind of the situation with God. It's the fear of Yahweh is the beginning of knowledge. If we really understand that we're messing with the creator of the heavens and the earth, and if he tells us to do something, we do it. We don't hold him in contempt, that kind of thing. So this was our introduction to Proverbs, and the fear of Yahweh is the beginning of knowledge, and Proverbs is to give prudence and discretion and wisdom, and that's what it does. In Proverbs 1:8, listen, my son, to your father's teaching. And Proverbs, like I say, it's written to the youth, And particularly, it's written to male children, to sons. Now, it applies to female children, but it's primarily written in a male-dominated culture. And that's why throughout Proverbs, you'll see my son, my son, my son. That will appear over and over again. But look at what verse 8 says. Listen, my son, to your father's teaching, and do not ignore the instruction of your mother. In the biblical culture, sometimes I've heard ministers and they kind of downplay a woman's role in the culture. It was not downplayed. In fact, mothers had a huge role in teaching their children. Fathers had a huge role in teaching their children. We live in a world today where children become independent very early, and they get their own phones, and a lot of them have their own bedrooms, and they have kind of what they think is sort of their own life. And then they resist, and this is natural for kids. They resist parental, they would think of it as interference, parental guidance, parental control, parental discipline, and they resist that. And sometimes parents crater to that. And you and I need to understand from the Word of God that us teaching our children and our grandchildren, and then if we have influence with other young people, we can influence them also. But we need to come against that resistance and not just give in to it. If you read Proverbs, then it says a child left to himself brings his mother disgrace. And that's precisely correct. If you just let your child raise him or herself, there will be problems. Children need parental guidance, parental control, parental discipline, and that's very much a part of Proverbs. Here it is in verse 8. Listen to the teaching, your father's teaching, and don't ignore the instruction of your mother, which is a way of saying listen to your mother too. Let's go to Proverbs 1:20. Now, in Proverbs 1:20, we're introduced to Lady Wisdom. If you're reading the Revised English Version, you see the word lady is in italics. But what's going on here is we're introducing wisdom in a more personal way, and we're going to make wisdom, the Bible makes wisdom a personification. In other words, what God is going to do is he's going to take the concept of wisdom and he's going to turn it into a person, in this case, a woman. And she's going to have female attendants, and that'll become important. We'll talk about that in a second. But why would God use personification? We humans kind of inherently understand other humans. We understand human feelings. We understand human actions. And so in the figure of speech personification, you take a concept and you make it into a person so that people can better understand it. So, for example, when we're talking about Christ coming back and remaking the earth and how the earth is going to be a much better place. There's going to be, the earth itself is going to be healed. It's going to be blessed, that kind of thing. Then you get verses like in Isaiah where it says, the trees will clap their hands. Now, you and I know trees don't have hands. But if, I could say something, if I were to make that literal, it'd be something like the trees will be very, very tree-like. They'll have great green leaves and strong branches and that kind of thing. Or, even if we say the trees will be happy, that's a personification. But that's exactly what's going to happen when Christ comes back and the earth is healed. The trees will be happy. There's a verse in the Psalms that when God was coming out of Egypt with the Israelites, it says the waters ran away, they fled. Well, they didn't run away, but basically what you get the picture of by the personification is that that God is moving and the water is going away from him very quickly. And so the idea of a personification is it takes a concept that could be difficult and makes it personal. And what you have in Proverbs is you have two women. One is called, and here we see it, we'll see the other in chapter 9. This one's Lady Wisdom. And Lady Wisdom is the personification of wisdom, and she does wise things. Now, The other woman that's her antipart, if you will, not antitype, but basically her adversary is Lady Folly. And Lady Folly does foolish things and lives foolishly. Now, Lady Wisdom has female attendants, and it's in Proverbs. If you were reading it in the Hebrew text, it's almost like God went out of his way to find feminine nouns that will describe Lady Wisdom's helpers, because you would have, in a court situation, you'd have, for example, the queen or the princess, and then she would have a lot of helpers around her. And so when we read Proverbs, we see Lady Wisdom, and then we see understanding, discernment, prudence, discretion, and these are all feminine nouns, and they're all with wisdom. So if you're reading Proverbs in Hebrew, you are left with the distinct impression that wisdom is like this queen or princess with all these helper women around her. And then if we get that picture, then what we get in our heart is, okay, if I'm going to be wise, I can't just be wise like it's a standalone thing. I've got to have understanding. I've got to have discernment. I've got to have prudence. I've got to have discretion. And these things then help me live a wise life. And so you see here in Proverbs chapter 1, verse 20, Lady Wisdom. Now, another thing is that since Lady Wisdom is a figure of speech, it's not just speaking about women. It's speaking about men and women. If you unpack the figure of speech, Lady Wisdom, it comes out as wise men and wise women. Because if you read Proverbs, wisdom, being personified as a woman, does things that in the culture a woman wouldn't do. They just, for example, the women would not go and shout aloud in the city gates like wisdom does. The men would do that. But Lady Wisdom here is this personification, and so she's personifying wise men and wise women. Similarly, Folly, Lady Folly, is personified as a woman, but she represents foolish men and foolish women. And you have to keep that in mind as you're reading Proverbs, and that helps you understand what Proverbs is doing, where it's going, and how it can send lessons to us. So let's start. Let's look at verse 20. So we're in Proverbs 1:20. Lady Wisdom shouts aloud in the street. In public places, she raises her voice. Verse 21, at the head of noisy streets, she calls out. Where the city gates open, she speaks her words. And so right away, we see Lady Wisdom in the gate of the city. And she's speaking loudly, she's shouting out. Now, who would actually be doing that? In the culture, it would be the elders of the gate, and they would be men. But here, basically, it's talking about the wise person is going to be found among the elders. And so if you are a youth, you are naive, you are inexperienced, you want help, you want wisdom. In today's world, people just hit Google on their phone. but it's actually better to find somebody who's wise. And so here's wisdom. And the point that the verse is making is that wisdom is available. You don't have to be naive. You don't have to be inexperienced. You can go and find wisdom in different places, and particularly among older, wiser, experienced people. But we've also got to follow the message that wisdom is bringing. Verse 22, how long, O naive ones, will you love naivete? And this becomes important because we do know people. We know brother and sister Christians that don't want to get involved. They don't want to get in the fight. You know, you talk to them and you say, how often do you share your faith? Oh, I never talk. I think religion is private. I never talk about that with people. You know, that people that think that way don't understand. This is why wisdom has understanding combined with her. They don't understand that we have an opportunity in this life to behave in such a way that we can get everlasting rewards. I mean, that's pretty cool. Or we have the opportunity to go home, sit on our couch, watch TV, and not bother anybody, and nobody bothers us. But at the judgment seat, we will lose out. And wisdom is get in the fight, earn some rewards, do something for God in kind of the way of David. You make a name for yourself by I loved Cindy's testimony this morning about how finding your ministry, finding out where you can plug in to make a difference. Verse 22 again, how long, O naive ones, will you love naivete? How long will mockers delight in mocking and fools hate knowledge? Basically, it's foolish to not want to get involved because you're giving up your own rewards that you could earn. But verse 23, if you turn back to me at my reproof, look, I will pour out my spirit upon you all. And in the Old Testament, you could get the spirit upon. If we get in the fight, we will consistently, and I can tell you this from experience, we will consistently get more revelation and more guidance. God doesn't need to give you guidance about what channel to watch on TV. God does need to give you guidance about where you can go to meet people, to witness to them, to have an effective life, that kind of thing. So he says, turn back at my reproof. I'll pour out my spirit. I'll make known my words to you all. Verse 24, but since you refused me when I called, and this becomes important, what happens to the people who refuse knowledge? What and wisdom? What happens to those people? Well, they end up in trouble. And so verse 24, since you refused me when I called, I stretched out my hand, no one paid attention. Verse 25, you neglected all my counsel, you did not want my reproof. Verse 26, I also will laugh at your distress. I will mock when what you dread comes, when your terror comes like a violent storm and your calamity like a whirlwind, and trouble and distress come upon you all. So what's going on here? Again, the personification. This is talking about wisdom and wise people and wise counsel. And if you ignore wise counsel and ignore wise counsel and ignore wise counsel, and then all of a sudden, you're deeply in trouble and you need help, and it's too late. You can't get the help you need. And just within the last week or so, someone I know passed away, and they had a form of cancer that could have been easily cured, but they ignored it and ignored it and ignored it and ignored it. And then it grew to the point that finally, when he did go to the hospital, they couldn't save his life and he passed away. And so this is an example of that. Wisdom cries out and cries out and cries out, do the right thing, be wise. But if you ignore that, then eventually things can get to the point that then, like it says, when wisdom says, verse 26, I will laugh at your distress, it's not that she laughs. Remember, this is not really a person. This is a concept. What's going on is it's saying, it's too late. I can't do anything. I called out. You didn't do anything. And then all of a sudden you're in trouble and you want me to bail you out, and I can't do it. It's like somebody who, they have a good job but they refuse to save money and refuse to save money and refuse to save money. Then they get to retirement and they have no money. It's like, well, you've got to keep working. Wisdom is so important. And verse 26 said, then I will laugh at your distress, meaning I can't do anything about this. Verse 28, they will call on me, but I will not answer. They will diligently seek me, but will not find me because it's too late. Verse 29, because they hated knowledge and because they did not choose the fear of Yahweh, they were not interested in my counsel. They spurned all my reproof. Verse 31, so they will eat from the fruit of their own way. In other words, they will get the consequences of their actions, and from their own schemes they will have their fill. For the turning away of the naive will kill them, and the false security of fools will destroy them. But the one who listens to me will live in safety, and will be at ease from the dread of evil. And when it talks about the one who listens to wisdom, remember that she's shouting aloud in the streets. Wisdom is coming from wise people. Okay, if you're a wise person, raise your hand. All of you are here. All of you love God. Exactly. Thank you, Eric. That's exactly right. We're all wise. And Hebrews 10 tells us that we're to spur one another on to love and good works. Like I know I need to exercise more. I need a little less. I had a man who I love talk to me this week about my weight, and it helped me. It helped get me refocused to, what, I need to do that. I need to quit saying or do it. I need to quit thinking about doing it. I just need to plain old get up and go to the gym, and I need to cut back on my portions. I need to do it. But it was in one sense, you think this shouldn't have been necessary. It should have been necessary that somebody came and actually said, "Hey, John, get your act together on this." But necessary or not, it helped me refocus. So I'm entering the next week with a new what would you call it, a new energy for going to the gym and cutting back on my portions. But just that one helpful thing and he took a risk. I mean, coming to me and telling me, "John, you need to take care of your weight." That's a risk. I could have gotten all mad and stuff like that, but it was just so incredibly helpful. So we're ending Proverbs. Let's go to Proverbs chapter 2. In Proverbs chapter 2, it's going to tell us the same thing, kind of, as Proverbs chapter 1, that wisdom is important. Verse 2, you've got to make your ear attentive to wisdom, discerning your hearts, or directing your hearts to discernment. Remember, discernment is one of the female attendants of wisdom. The word discernment, the word understanding in Hebrew, the word prudence, these are all feminine nouns. They're all like little women that surround wisdom and help her out. And then verse 3, if you call out for understanding, if you raise your voice to discernment, if you seek her like silver and search for her like hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of Yahweh and you will find the knowledge of God. Verse 6, for Yahweh gives wisdom. Yahweh gives wisdom. That is so important. Yahweh gives wisdom, not television, not the internet, not the stuff that you listen to a lot of times on, because I think all of you understand there's a difference in people out there. There are people who are very liberal, who don't believe in God, who don't read the Bible, who don't have God's understanding of life in their heart and in their mind, and they speak about that. And then there are people who believe God. And we've got to be discerning. Verse 2, directing your heart to discernment. Verse 3, raise your voice to discernment. What's the meaning of discernment? It's where the basic meaning is separation. You separate this from that. And in discernment, we separate the truth from the lie, from what is right, from what is wrong, for who to listen to and who not to listen to. And discernment's important, but it's not innate. It's something that we've got to work at. And that's why it says, if you seek her like silver and search for her like hidden treasure, where are you going to look? If I'm going to seek and search, where am I going to go? Am I going to dig a hole in the ground? Where am I going to go? And then verse 6 answers that and says, for Yahweh gives wisdom. Oh, I get it. If I read the Bible and then talk to other Christians and come to an understanding of what the text is saying, then what's going to happen is my wisdom will increase, my discernment will increase, my prudence will increase. All those things will come about because from Yahweh comes wisdom. From his mouth comes forth knowledge and discernment. And so that's super important. Let's go down to verse 10. As we're reading the Bible, we're asking Yahweh. It says, verse 10, wisdom will come into your heart. Knowledge will be pleasant to your soul. Discretion will watch over you. Discernment will guard you. So you see what's happening here. Wisdom and all her female attendants, as we read the word of God, as we are attentive to Yahweh for what is his guidance, what is his wisdom, what are his standards, as we're becoming attuned to that, then Wisdom comes into our heart. Knowledge is pleasant. Discretion watches over us. Discernment, God, all these quote people, if you will, come into our life and surround us and help us in guidance and that kind of thing. So then verse 12, to deliver you from the way of evil, from the one who is speaking perverse things, from the ones who forsake the upright paths. And how do we know they're speaking evil? How do we know that what they're saying is perverse? How do we know they've forsaken the upright paths? Because we've listened to Yahweh. And because we've listened to Yahweh and gained his guidance, his discernment, his prudence, then we can discern good from evil and what is right and what is not. Let's go to chapter 3. In Proverbs chapter 3, verse 13. Blessed is the person who finds wisdom and the one who obtains discernment. For the gain of her is better than the gain from silver, and her revenue is better than gold. And that's because the rewards that we get from God are better than anything here on earth. Verse 16, in her right hand is length of days. Yeah, really long days, like everlasting. You believe in the Lord, get saved, and you get length of days, okay? You get everlasting life. In her hand, in her left hand are riches and glory, because down here on earth, as you walk in wisdom with discernment, you're making good choices, then there are riches and glory. Sometimes it's not earthly riches, it's just riches in your heart and in your life and in your relationships. Verse 17, her ways are pleasant ways, and all her pathways are peace. And that's good, because when you're living a wise life, then there's much less, kind of looking over your shoulder, expecting trouble. You're in much better position to navigate through some of the difficult situations in life, and you get peace. That's beautiful. Verse 18, she's a tree of life. Blessed are those who are holding her fast. And then it tells us in verse 19 that Yahweh himself is in league with wisdom. Verse 19, Yahweh founded the earth by wisdom. He established the heavens by discernment. Now, there's two things going on here. One is the simple truth that Yahweh used wisdom and discernment when he created the universe. I mean, he didn't create the universe and say, didn't think it through far enough. Got a lot of bugs. Might have to create another one. The first one was a beta. He didn't do that. He used wisdom and discernment, and he created the earth with that great wisdom. So that's one level. But then the other thing is, we would expect that. Why does the Bible say that? Because there's a lot of things we do in our life. If we're going to be imitators of God, like the New Testament Ephesians 5 tells us to be, if we're going to be imitators of God, and God started with wisdom, if we're going to start a project, what do we want to start with? We want to start with wisdom as well. And that way we won't get ourselves in trouble. Let's go to chapter 4, Proverbs chapter 4. And Proverbs chapter 4, starting in verse 3. And I like this because remember, this is the father. Proverbs is the father talking to the son. And he says, when I was a son with my father. And so now he's reflecting, to his son, and he's talking to his son about his grandfather, the son's grandfather. And he said, when I was a son with my father, a tender and only son in the sight of my mother, he taught me and said to me, let your heart hold on to my words, keep my commandments and live. Verse 5, get wisdom, get understanding. So what does the father say to his child? Get wisdom, get understanding. If you have these things and all that peace and those riches and the glory and the goodness and the long life and all that will be yours. And if you don't have it, then you're going to have trouble upon trouble. Like it said in chapter 1, when the day of your distress comes, you'll call out, but it's going to be too late. Nobody will be there to help you. So the father says to his son, get wisdom, get understanding. Do not forget and do not turn away from the words of my mouth. The dad says, I've been there. I've done that. I can tell you, believe me, it's a whole lot better to be wise than to be foolish. It just makes life a lot easier. Verse 6, do not abandon her. Again, wisdom being portrayed as a woman, and she will watch over you. Love her and she will guard you. And that's so true. You know, if we're wise, then we have much less trouble in life. And then verse 7, wisdom is the principal thing. So get wisdom. And with all your purchases, purchase understanding. And that was an interesting verse to translate because, you know, at first you kind of rebel a little bit, like, should I have to buy understanding? Shouldn't understanding be free? But the fact of the matter is, in a whole bunch of situations in life, we have to pay something to get true wisdom and understanding. You know, even if it's you've decided to work on your own car and you want to buy a manual so you don't mess things up, or you can do like I do and hire a mechanic so you don't mess things up. I am not very mechanical, but seriously, this, you know, that it was like, does it really say purchase understanding? And yes, it really says purchase understanding. By the way, when it says wisdom is the principal thing, so get wisdom. Remember in chapter 1 when we talked about what Proverbs was doing, and it says to help you understand the riddles of the wise, that things are often said in riddles. The precise same Hebrew that can be translated wisdom is the principal thing, so get wisdom, can also be translated as the beginning of wisdom is get wisdom. So if you want to be wise, the beginning of it is focus up and get wisdom. You know, don't just put it on a back burner and try to get it later. But I like the translation. You know, it speaks to me a little more. Wisdom is the principal thing. So get wisdom. Verse 8, exalt her and she will lift you up. In other words, if you make wisdom and wise choices important in your life, you will be lifted up. You will be blessed. She will honor you because you embrace her. When the person embraces wisdom, then wisdom turns around and helps us. And that's really important stuff. So let's go to Proverbs chapter 5. And in Proverbs chapter 5, we kind of get introduced to the adversary, if you will, of wisdom, which is folly, in this case, being called the strange woman. So verse 1 says, my son, pay attention to my wisdom, incline your ear to my discernment, in order that you may keep discretion and your lips guard knowledge. Verse 3, why? For the lips of a strange woman. Now, who's the strange woman? Well, in the same way that wisdom has her attendants, discernment and prudence and that kind of thing, the foolishness or the lady folly is also known as a strange woman or a foreign woman, using two different Hebrew words for strange and foreign. So the strange woman is also the same as folly. It's a foolish decision, a foolish move to make. Verse 3, for the lips of the strange woman drip honey. And again, one of the things that you see as you read Proverbs and understand it this way is here's the young men, and young men are interested in women. And so it makes good sense that here's Lady Wisdom, and she's calling to try to attract the young men. And there's Lady Folly, and she's calling and trying to attract the young men. And so the young man has got to make decisions between what is a foolish choice and what is a wise choice. And that's the same thing that you and I do every day. We're constantly in this battle where we're faced with the difference between good choices, bad choices, or foolish choices and wise choices. So verse 3, the lips of a strange woman drip honey, and her mouth is smoother than oil. But in the end, she's bitter as wormwood, which is a bitter herb. She is sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps proceed toward Sheol. So once again, we see here that it's very important the choice you make. You can make the wise choice or you can make the foolish choice. A lot of times, the foolish choice offers instant gratification and sounds really good. But if you've got wisdom's help or discernment, then you can say, you know what? That sounds good, but that's not going to work. So let's go to Proverbs chapter 7. And in Proverbs chapter 7, once again, we see the strange woman, and here called the foreign woman. If we look at verse 4, say to wisdom, you are my sister, and call understanding my relative. So here's wisdom paired with one of her helpers, understanding. And he says, you want those women to be your sister, your relative. They're close to you. They speak into your life. And what will they do? Verse 5, in order to keep you from the strange woman, from the foreign woman who flatters with her words. And that's exactly right. So many times, foolish things are presented in a good light by words, but we use discernment. Like I remember, I don't know if they still do this. I don't think so. I haven't seen an ad like this, but a number of years ago, there was an ad. I believe it was for Mountain Dew, and the tagline was, obey your thirst. And I thought, that's really a foolish thing to do, because that's a great way, you just drink a bunch of soda pop all day long, and that's a great way to get sick and to get overweight and to have all kinds of health problems and whatever. And there's no ad on TV about obey God. There ought to be. We live in a basic, I'm serious. I mean, think about all the Christians there are in the world. There ought to be an ad about, the wise person obeys God, or get wisdom, or the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, or something like that. That our culture, the devil is still the God of this world, and he changes the culture to where God is minimized and doing foolish things is maximized. And we don't want to do that. So we want to make wisdom our sister and understanding our relative, and it'll keep us from the strange woman. How do we unpack that and get away from the figure and use logic? It's read the Bible, find out what Yahweh says, and then have the self-control to not do stupid things and the motivation to do wise things. And that's how you unpack that. Now let's go to Proverbs 8. And again, I like what's going on here because it's both true and it's a double lesson. In Proverbs 8, verse 23 or verse 22, is talking about wisdom. And it says, Yahweh created me at the beginning of his journey prior to his works from back then. Before God spoke the universe into being, what did he do? He worked with wisdom, so that when he made the universe, it would be made wisely and fit together. He created me at the beginning of his journey. That's a fact, but it's also a lesson that if we're going to start a project, let's start with wisdom. Verse 23, from antiquity I was woven together, from the start, from the earliest times of the earth. Verse 24, I was born when there were no deep oceans, when there were no springs abounding with waters. Verse 25, before the mountains were settled, before the hills were formed, I was born. When he had not yet made the earth and the fields, or the initial dust of the world, when he prepared the heavens, I was there. And then he goes on. So again, an encouragement, when we're using wisdom, we're following in God's footsteps because he used wisdom. He planned first and then acted. And let's go to Proverbs 9, Proverbs chapter 9. And Proverbs chapter 9 is, we now get to where Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly are juxtaposed together in the same chapter. And you can see how they work against each other. Verse 1, Lady Wisdom has built her house. She has carved out her 7 pillars, which are necessary for sustaining a big house in that culture. Verse 2, she's slaughtered her meat. She's mixed her wine. She's prepared her table. She's sent out her female servants. She calls from the tops of the heights of the town, whoever is naive, let him turn in here. To the one lacking sense, she says, come, eat my food and drink my wine that I have mixed. Leave your naive ways and live. Go straight ahead on the road of understanding. So wisdom is inviting people into her presence, into an intimate relationship with her, if you will. And she has prepared for people. She's not being caught off guard. She's built her house. She's made sure it's got a firm, stable building with 7 pillars. She's already killed the food she's going to serve. She's already mixed her wine. She's prepared for people if we will come. Now we go down to verse 13, and we see Lady Folly. And this is, you can see, watch what's the same and watch different. What's different? Lady Folly is boisterous. She's lacking in understanding. She doesn't know anything. And you know that foolish things are often very in your face. Hey, come, let's do this. Come, let's do that. That type of thing. That foolish people are very often very overconfident, very arrogant, very loud, very boisterous, but they lack understanding. Verse 14, she sits at the entrance of her house on a throne at the height of the city, calling out to those passing by on the road, to the ones making their paths straight. Whoever is naive, let him turn in here. Now look at verse 4. Whoever is naive, let him turn in here. Wisdom and folly have the same invitation. And you and I, when we're confronted with life, we have foolish choices, wise choices, both ahead of us. Foolish choices usually involve instant gratification, and kind of have to put the things of God and ignore what God is saying. The wisdom and following through with wisdom usually involves things like getting prudence, gaining wisdom, being patient, working hard, that kind of thing. So there's a difference as we move forward. And what does Lady Folly say? Verse 17, stolen waters are sweet, and food eaten in secret is pleasant. So she's talking about, hiding her sin, hiding sexual sin, hiding the stuff that she's stolen from people. And that's, of course, what foolish people do. Verse 18, but the naive person does not know that the dead are there. They don't push forward to get wisdom, knowledge, guidance. They don't know that they're going to miss out on everlasting life or rewards. And the ones who accepted her invitation are in the depth of Sheol, which is the depth of being dead. In other words, the ones who have listened to folly and followed folly's ways are dead, or will die. And that's sadly a reality. So Proverbs then, as we read this, it's very important that we read it in the culture that it's in, but also unpack it to realize that Lady Folly is just a figure of speech for foolish people and what foolish people present. And Lady Wisdom is a figure for wise people and what wise people present. And then Lady Folly pushes her agenda, which is stolen waters are sweet and bread eaten in secret is delicious, that kind of thing. Where Lady Wisdom, she's worked, she's prepared, she's gotten things ready. It takes work, it takes patience, that kind of stuff. And you and I have the opportunity to make wise choices. And like I say, I didn't put a lot of emphasis on this, but the sister, if you will, of wisdom is self-control, because it's one thing to know what to do and another to do it. And prudence takes up with that. When you understand the difference between wisdom, which is more a mental thing, having the wisdom, and prudence, which is you're now living it out. Theoretically, the wise person is prudent, but that's not always true. There's a lot of knowledgeable people that end up doing stupid things. But the prudent person always does prudent stuff. That's why they're called prudent. So you have wisdom and then the sister self-control, and then you and I can move forward to what is wise. So I would make an appeal here as we close for number one, being wise and getting our wisdom from Yahweh and not from the world. And then number two, if you're needing, to figure out more, what could I do to read in the Bible? What could I interest my children, my grandchildren in, that kind of thing, other people? Proverbs is always a great place to start because you don't have to know history. You don't have to know the context like you do, say, if you're going to start a book like even like Genesis or Isaiah or something like that. So it's an easy way to read the Bible and learn these little truths that set us on the right path through life. So thank you for your attention this morning. It's been a blessing to do this work, and I hope that it's been a blessing to you.